Your child is smart, you know it, the teachers know it, yet somehow they never seem to have their homework. They forget their assignments, they lose their papers, their backpack looks like a disaster zone, their projects are always started the night before they're due, and sooner or later someone says, he's just lazy, or she just needs to try harder. If they would apply themselves, they'd be successful. But what if that's wrong? What if what looks like laziness is actually something very different? Today we're talking about executive functioning and why understanding it may completely change the way you view your child, your students, or even yourself. Welcome back to Beyond the IEP with Dr. D. I'm Dr. Frank Dykes, and over the course of my career as a teacher, educational diagnostician, special education director, and university professor and evaluator, I've met countless students who were labeled as lazy, and many of them weren't lazy at all. They were struggling with something we call executive functioning. The tragedy is when we misunderstand executive functioning deficits, we often respond in ways that make the problem worse. We punish, we criticize, we lecture, we increase the pressure, we take something away when what students actually need is support. Today we're going to answer these 5 questions. What is executive functioning? What do executive functioning deficits look like? How are they often mistaken for laziness? And how do they affect performance? And most importantly, what can parents and educators do to help? So let's get started. What is executive functioning? The simplest way to understand executive function is to think of it as the brain's management system. Executive function helps us do things like plan and organize, prioritize, manage our time, start tasks, control our impulses, monitor our work, adjust when things aren't working. Think of executive functioning as the CEO of the brain. The CEO of a company doesn't perform every task, but they do is they coordinate the task, and it keeps everything moving in the right direction. And when executive functioning is strong, people are more likely to be able to do things like stay organized and meet their deadlines and follow multi-step directions to complete projects and to manage their own responsibilities. Now, when executive functioning is weak, everyday activities become much harder. Here's something important. Executive functioning has nothing to do with intelligence. Now, let me repeat that again. Executive functioning has nothing to do with intelligence. Some of the brightest students you'll ever meet struggle tremendously with executive functioning. And that's why parents are often confused. They'll say things like, my child is so smart, why can't they keep up with their assignments? And the answer often has nothing to do with intelligence, it has to do with management skills. What do executive functioning deficits look like? Well, let's talk about that. One student may struggle with organization. Their desk is a mess, their backpack is overflowing, and they're constantly losing their materials. Another student may struggle with task initiation. They stare at the paper. They know what they're supposed to do, and they want to do it, but getting started just feels impossible. Another student with executive functioning deficits may struggle with time management. Every project is underestimated. Every deadline becomes a surprise. Every assignment becomes a last-minute crisis. Others struggle with working memory. You give 3 directions, they remember 1. You explain a process, halfway through they forget what comes next. Still others struggle with self-monitoring. They rush through their work. They overlook their mistakes. They don't recognize problems until someone points them out. Notice something important. None of those behaviors sound like laziness. They're skill deficits, yet they're frequently interpreted as character flaws. And that misunderstanding can be incredibly damaging to students. Let's talk a little bit about the student that everyone misunderstands. Let me describe a student to you. You may recognize this student. Maybe it's your child, or maybe it's a student that you've taught before. Maybe it's even you. The student is bright. They participate in all the class discussions. They answer questions correctly. They understand the concepts that you've taught. They're performing well on their test, but assignments are constantly missing. Projects are always late. Materials are disappearing. Deadlines are missed. Teachers become frustrated. Parents become frustrated. Eventually, when someone says, they just don't care. But here's the question. If they don't care, why are they upset when they fail? Why are they anxious about school? Why do they promise themselves they'll do better? The answer is because many of these students care deeply. The problem isn't motivation. The problem is execution. They struggle to translate their intentions into action. That's executive functioning. Now let's take a real world example. Imagine a student named Ethan. And Ethan is a middle school student. He's very intelligent. He understands classroom instruction. He participates in the classroom discussions. When you talk one-on-one with him, it's obvious that he's capable. Yet, his grades don't reflect that ability. Why? Well, again, because assignments are missing. Projects are incomplete. He's losing his materials. Teachers say, if Ethan just would apply himself. Parents say, I just don't understand. He knows this. And an evaluation reveals significant executive functioning weaknesses. Suddenly, everything comes together and it makes sense. The problem wasn't his ability. The problem wasn't his effort. The problem was managing the process. What are those processes? Well, they're things like planning and organizing and initiating and monitoring and completing. And once supports are put in place and implemented, Ethan can begin to succeed. Not because he's any smarter, because his actual needs are finally understood. Now let's talk a little bit about ADHD and executive functioning. Many parents hear about executive functioning when ADHD enters the conversation, and there is a strong connection. Students with ADHD frequently experience executive functioning difficulties, but executive functioning deficits are not limited to ADHD. Students with learning disabilities, autism, anxiety, traumatic brain injury, and even gifted students may experience executive functioning challenges. Executive function is not a diagnosis. It's a collection of cognitive skills. And weaknesses in any of these skills that I've talked about can affect different learners. So let's talk about what doesn't work. What doesn't help is repeated lectures saying things like, try harder, get organized, be more responsible, pay attention. If you'd care, you'd do it. Most students with executive functioning difficulties have heard these statements thousands of times. The problem is that these responses focus on motivation. Executive functioning deficits are skill-based, not motivational-based. You can't lecture someone into having stronger executive functioning skills. Just like you can't lecture someone into reading better. Skills must be taught, supported, practiced, and developed. So let's talk about what actually does help. The good news is that executive functioning skills can be supported, and students often benefit from things such as visual schedules, checklists, planners, timers, task breakdown, color-coded systems, digital reminders, structured routines, frequent progress checks, assignment trackers. Technology can also be incredibly helpful. Many successful adults with executive functioning delays often rely on calendars, reminder apps, alarms, and organizational tools every day. The goal isn't dependence. The goal is creating systems that help students succeed while they're developing better executive functioning skills. Think of supports like a scaffold. We provide support while those skills are growing, and then we gradually reduce the supports as independence increases. So let's talk about the most important question. I'd like to leave you with this one question. Instead of asking, why won't my child do this? Ask, what's making this difficult for my child? That one question changes everything. It moves us away from blame, and it moves us more toward understanding. And understanding is where solutions begin. So let's review some key takeaways from today. Executive function is the brain's management system. Executive functioning deficits are often mistaken for laziness. And many students who struggle with organization, planning, time management, task initiation, and self-monitoring are not unmotivated. They are struggling with skills that support successful performance. The goal is not to punish those struggles. The goal is to understand and provide support. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Beyond the IEP with Dr. D. And if you found this video helpful, please take a moment to like and subscribe and share it with another parent or educator or advocate. And now it's time for Ask Dr. D. What questions do you have about executive functioning, ADHD, learning disabilities, IEPs, or special education? Just leave your question in the comments below, and it may be featured in a future Ask Dr. D episode. And remember, sometimes what looks like laziness is actually a student struggling with skills that they have not yet mastered. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.